Everybody in Pinto Wash figured they knew what would happen to the Hale girl once her daddy signed her over to Cole Renner. 19 years old, married off to settle a car debt, sent up a mountain road to a man who hadn't spoken a full sentence in town since he buried his first wife. They figured wrong. I know because I was there for all of it, every cold supper, every locked door, every night she sat on the edge of that bed expecting the worst thing a frightened girl can expect. I'm the one who watched her learn what Cole Renner was really hiding behind that ranch. And I'll tell you straight, it wasn't cruelty. It was something he'd have died to keep secret. This is the part nobody in town ever heard. Stay with me to the end, because the truth about that marriage didn't come out in the church, or the parlor, or the law office. It came out one night in a snowstorm, when a girl who'd been bought had to decide whether to lie to a marshal's face to save people she'd been raised to fear. That's where I'll leave you wondering. Let's begin. The first thing I wrote in my ledger about Nora Hale was a lie, and I didn't even know it yet. Renner's bride, quiet, won't last the month. I keep a ledger, have for 30 years. Tally marks for the head of cattle, the sacks of flour, the days since rain. My mother used to say a man who counts everything trusts nothing, and she wasn't wrong, God rest her. But a man my age with a hip that grinds like a dry axle every time the weather turns has got to put his faith in something, and I'd long since decided to put mine in numbers. Numbers don't lie to you. People do. I'd have bet the whole Sweetwater spread on that. So the bride. She came up the Wash Road in the back of Holly's Hale's wagon like a sack of seed corn nobody had paid for yet, and that's near enough what she was. I was mending the corral gate when they rolled in, and I watched over the top rail the way you watch a storm you can't do anything about. The wagon stopped. Hale climbed down, fat in the gut, thin in the conscience, the kind of man whose handshake you count your fingers after. And then the girl. She didn't climb down so much as lower herself, careful, both hands gripping the wagon board like the ground might not be there when her boots found it. Plain gray dress. A carpetbag that had seen better owners. Hair the color of weak coffee, pinned up tight, and a face, Lord, that face. Not crying. That's what got me. A crying girl I'd have understood. This one had gone past crying into something flatter and colder. The look of somebody who has already decided how the story ends and is just waiting to get it over with. Cole came out of the house. He didn't hurry, he never hurried. I should tell you about Cole since you'll be spending 3 stories worth of nights with him. Big man, but quiet big, the way a closed door is big. He'd come to the territory 8 years back, built the Sweetwater up out of scrub and stubbornness, married a woman the town never warmed to, and then buried her, and after that he stopped coming down the mountain for anything but salt, nails, and coffee. People called him cold. People who'd never split a winter's wood for a sick neighbor and left it on the porch without knocking, the way I'd seen him do. But the town liked its stories simple, and Cold Cole Renner was a simple story, so that's the one they kept. He stopped in front of Hale and didn't put out his hand. The papers, Cole said. Hale produced them. There was a sum written on one, and I won't repeat it because it shamed me to see a girl's whole life weighed against a number that small. Cole looked at it, looked at her. Something crossed his face. I was too far to read it, and I've spent 2 years trying to remember it right, and the honest truth is I can't. Anger, maybe, or recognition, or just tiredness. You can go, Cole told Hale. Now hold on, there's the matter of. You can go, Cole said again, and this time it wasn't louder, it was just final, the way a gate is final once it's latched. Hale went. The wagon turned in the yard and rattled back down the wash, and the girl stood in the dust it left, holding her bag, and not one part of her moved to follow it. She had nowhere to go. We all 3 of us knew it. Cole looked at her a long moment. You hungry? He asked. She didn't answer. I think she'd braced so hard for the worst that an ordinary question went right through her without catching on anything. Wally, Cole said, that's me, Wallace Tibbs. In case the ledger didn't introduce us proper, tell Marisol to set a 3rd plate. And he turned and walked back into the house and left her standing there, and that, friends, was the strangest wedding night I ever bore witness to. No vows that I heard, no ring that I saw, just a third plate. I'll be honest about what I expected, because the whole point of this telling is that I was wrong, and a man ought to lay out his wrongness plain before he gets to the part where he learned better. I expected the worst. Same as she did. I'd seen marriages like this one, bought marriages, debt marriages, and I'd seen what became of the women in them, and it curdled my stomach every time. I figured that first night I'd lie in the bunkhouse with my pillow over my ears, and I'm not proud to tell you I figured it because that's how low my expectation of men had sunk, Cole included. What I heard instead was a door. Just the one. Cole's boots on the floorboards, the back bedroom door opening, and then, this is the part I sat up for, closing, with him on the outside of it. I heard him cross to the front room. I heard the creak of the old horsehair sofa taking his weight. And I heard nothing else from that house all night but the wind and the coyotes and my own slow figuring. He'd given her the bedroom. He was sleeping on the sofa. I made a tally mark in the dark, the way I do when something doesn't fit my count, and I went asleep more confused than I'd been in years. The girl, Nora, I'll call her Nora now, since by the second day even I had stopped thinking of her as the bride, did not trust it. Of course she didn't. Would you? She moved through that house the first week like a cat in a strange barn, all edges and exits, eating fast when she ate at all, sitting where she could see the door. When Cole spoke to her, she answered in 3 words or fewer. When he came near, she went still in a way that wasn't calm. It was the stillness of a creature that has learned that flinching only draws the hand faster. And Cole, here's the thing I started to notice, the thing that broke my simple story open. Cole saw it. He saw the stillness and he started leaving more room. He'd come into a doorway and stop, give her time to know he was there before he crossed it. He took to announcing himself on the stairs, a heavy deliberate step so she'd never be surprised. He set her plate down and stepped back before she reached for it. Small things. The kind of things you only do if you've spent time learning what fear looks like from the inside, and have decided to be the opposite of whatever taught it. I put these in my ledger too. Day 4, gave her wide berth at the well. Day 6, knocked before entering own kitchen. And under those, smaller because I was beginning to feel like a fool, he is not what I tallied him. One evening, this would have been the second week, she finally asked him the question she'd been carrying up the mountain in that carpet bag all along. I was on the porch oiling tack, and the window was open, and I'm not sorry I listened. When, she said, just that. When are you going to? And she couldn't finish it, and she didn't have to. There was a long quiet. I stopped oiling. Never, Cole said. I heard her breath go out of her, ragged, like a rope coming off a strained cleat. I don't understand, she said. I didn't buy a wife, Miss Hale. His voice was low and rough and careful, like a man handling something he knew could cut him. I bought you out from under your father before he could sell you to a Saboan, who put 2 women in the ground before you and would have made you the 3rd. The marriage is so the law can't give you back to him. That's all it is. That's all it's ever going to be. A pause. You've got the bedroom and the door's got a bolt on the inside and I put it there myself. You can leave when you've somewhere safe to leave to. Till then you eat at my table and you're under my roof and nobody touches you, including me. I sat on that porch with a bridle in my hands and felt about 2 inches tall and about 100 years old, and something else underneath both of those that I didn't have a word for yet. I do now. I'll get to it. Inside, Nora didn't say anything for a long, long while. Then she said very quietly, "Why?" And Cole Renner, who hadn't said 20 words in town in 2 years, said nothing at all. Got up, went out the back, and I heard him walk down toward the far paddock, the one past the cottonwoods that he kept locked, the one none of us hands were allowed near, the one I'd never thought to wonder about because a man's entitled to a locked gate on his own land. But Nora wondered. I watched her watch him go. I watched her stand at that window a long time after he disappeared into the dark past the cottonwoods. And I saw the first thing cross her face since she'd climbed down out of that wagon that wasn't fear. It was curiosity. That's the most dangerous thing in the world, friends, more dangerous than fear. Fear keeps you small and safe. Curiosity gets you killed or gets you living, and on that mountain in that winter, it was about to be a near thing which. The snow came early that year. It came the night Nora finally followed him. I know because I followed her, old fool with a bad hip, picking my way through the cottonwoods in the first hard flakes, telling myself I was protecting her, and knowing full well I was just as curious as she was, and a good deal less brave about admitting it. The locked paddock had a barn at the back of it, low and long, the kind you'd build for sick stock you wanted kept separate. There was lamplight under the door. Nora reached it before me. She had her hand on the latch. I opened my mouth to call out, to stop her, to say, "Girl, there's things on this mountain that ain't ours to know." And the door opened from the inside. A woman stood in the lamplight. Not Marisol, not anyone from town. An old woman, straight-backed, with silver in her dark hair and a face like worked leather and eyes that took the both of us in, the trembling girl and the gaping old man, without a flicker of surprise, as though she'd been expecting us for some time and was only mildly disappointed it had taken us this long. Behind her, the barn was warm and full of breath and shadow, and there were people in it, wrapped in blankets, more than I could count in that first stunned second, though Lord knows I tried. And from somewhere in that warm dark, a child's voice, sleepy and small, said a word in a language I didn't speak. But I'd heard Cole's first wife speak it years ago, before the town froze her out. The old woman's name was Desi, though that wasn't all of it, just the part she gave to whites the way you'd give a stranger your hand and not your whole arm. She'd been a healer to her people before the soldiers and the sickness and the long forced walks broke her band into pieces. And she was, I'd learn, the closest thing Cole Renner had to a mother-in-law, and the only living soul besides him who knew the whole truth. There were 9 of them in that barn. I counted, because of course I counted. 9 Chiricahua, 2 of them children, 1 of them a man with a leg wound gone bad, all of them hiding on Cole's land through a winter that would have killed them in the open. They were the last of a band that had slipped the reservation. Not for war, I want to be clear, but because the agency rations had run out, and the agency doctor had let their old ones die, and a young mother had decided she'd rather risk the mountains than watch her children starve under a government roof. Cole had found them half frozen in his high pasture in the first cold, and had done the only thing his particular conscience would let him do, which was the dangerous thing, the illegal thing, the thing that could have gotten him hanged. He'd taken them in, and he'd kept them in. And to keep them, he'd needed the world to believe the Sweetwater was just a quiet rancher and his quiet white bride, nothing to see, nothing to search. A bachelor's spread draws suspicion in hard times. A married man's spread with a respectable Christian wife behind the curtains, that draws nothing at all. That was the secret. That was the whole of why a man had married a girl he'd never once intended to touch. "He told me about you," Desi said, sitting Nora down by the stove, pressing a tin cup of something hot into her shaking hands as though she were the host and we the foundlings. "He said he could not leave you to that man Bowen. I told him a soft heart in a hard winter is how a fox empties the henhouse." She studied Nora over the rim of her own cup. "But here you are, and you came looking, so perhaps your heart is not so soft, perhaps it is only young." Nora looked around that barn, at the wounded man, at the children, at the young mother watching her with a face every bit as braced as Nora's own had been 2 weeks back. 2 people who'd each decided how their story ended and were waiting to be proven right. And the thing I will carry to my grave is this: Nora did not run. A girl raised on the same penny dreadfuls and pulpit warnings as the rest of us, raised to believe the very people in that barn were the boogeymen at the edge of every frontier nightmare, looked at 9 starving human beings and a sick man's blackening leg, and the fear went out of her face, and something else came in. and she set down her cup and said, "That wound's gone septic. He needs it cleaned and packed twice a day or he'll lose the leg and then he'll lose more than that." She looked up at Desi. "I nursed my mother through the fever before she passed. I know how to keep a wound. Show me what you've got and I'll tell you what we're short." "I want to tell you," Desi smiled. She didn't. She just looked at Nora a good while, the way Cole had looked at the debt paper, weighing a life against a number. Then she nodded once, and that nod was worth more than any wedding ever blessed in any church, and the two of them bent over that man's ruined leg together, the old healer and the girl who'd been sold. And I stood there in the doorway with the snow on my shoulders and finally found the word for the thing I'd been feeling. The word was shame, and right behind it, close as a shadow, the word was hope. Cole found us there an hour later. He came through the door with snow in his hair and murder in his face. And then he saw Nora kneeling by the wounded man, sleeves rolled, hands red to the wrist, working, and the murder ran right off him and left something raw and unguarded underneath. And for 1 second I saw exactly the man the town had decided didn't exist. He didn't shout. He didn't drag her out. He stood there and watched his bought bride save the leg of a man the whole territory would have cheered him for turning in. And when she finally sat back on her heels, spent, he said the only thing I ever heard him say that sounded like a prayer. "You weren't supposed to find this." "No," Nora agreed, not looking up. "I wasn't supposed to find any of it. I wasn't supposed to find a bolt on the inside of my own door either, or a man who sleeps on a sofa in his own house." Now she did look up at him, and the flatness was gone from her face entirely, burned clean off by the work and the warmth and the terrible relief of it. "You should have told me, Cole. You let me spend 2 weeks thinking." She stopped, swallowed. "You let me think you were the thing I needed saving from. When the whole time you were just—" And she gestured at the barn, the blankets, the breathing dark, unable to finish. "If you'd known and they'd caught us," Cole said, "you'd have hanged too. I married you to keep you out of one grave. I wasn't going to walk you into a worse one." And that, friends, is the moment I understood the man. He'd lied to her by keeping silent, but he'd lied to protect her, the same as he did everything, clumsy and stubborn and 10 degrees colder on the outside than the furnace running underneath. He didn't know how to be soft, so he'd been safe instead and called it the same thing, the way a lot of us do. It was Nora who knew the difference. "There's a child," she said suddenly. She'd heard it too, that first night, the sleepy voice in the dark. "There were 2 children, I counted, but there's a third. I heard one before I came in and there's only 2 here now." The barn went still. Desi and Cole exchanged a look that had years in it. And then Cole said very low, "She's not theirs, she's mine." Her name was Wren. Her mother's name had been Tawny, and Tawny had been Cole's wife. The woman the town froze out. The woman he buried 2 years back. The woman whose language a sleepy child still dreamed in. Tawny had died bringing Wren into the world, and Cole had been raising the girl in secret ever since, because a half Apache child in that territory in those years did not get to grow up free. She got taken to a mission school 300 miles off, where they'd cut her hair and burn her dresses and beat the Apache out of her mouth until she forgot she'd ever had a mother at all. Cole had seen it happen to other children. He'd decided it would not happen to his. So Wren lived hidden, up at Desi's barn when riders came through, down at the house when the coast was clear, a little ghost of a girl who'd learned before she could walk to be quiet when strangers were near. 4 years old. And the night Nora found the barn, she'd been bundled off into the back stall the second the latch turned, because that was the rule, that was the iron rule of her whole small life. When the door opens, disappear. Nora was quiet for a long time after Cole told her. Then she got up and she walked to the back stall and she crouched down in the straw and she said softly, the way you'd talk to a fawn, "Hello, my name's Nora. I'm not going to tell anyone you're here. Not ever, I promise." And a small face came out of the dark. "I had to leave the barn then. A man my age oughtn't to let girls and children see him cry. It ruins the discipline of the ranch. I stood out in the snow and I took out my ledger, and in the lamplight from the doorway I crossed out every single thing I'd written about Nora Hale in 2 weeks, every cold little tally, and under it I wrote one line, and it's the truest line in 30 years of ledgers. She came up that mountain expecting the worst. She is becoming the best of us. I'd like to tell you that was the end of the danger. It was the beginning of it. Because 3 days later, with the snow piled hip-high in the wash, and the wounded man's leg finally starting to turn the corner Nora had fought it toward, a rider came up the road. A U.S. Marshal, name of Prout, and he wasn't lost. He was hunting 9 Chiricahua who'd slipped the reservation, and his information somebody in town had talked. Somebody always talks had brought him to the Sweetwater, and he sat his horse in our yard with a rifle across the saddle and a paper in his coat that gave him the right to search every building on the place, and he said, friendly as a snake, "Renner, heard you took a wife. Mind if she answers a question or two? Women folk notice things." Cole's face was stone. Mine, I'm sure, was a sweatsheen of guilt that a blind man could have read. And the locked barn sat up past the cottonwoods with 9 lives in it and a child who knew that when the door opened, she disappeared. Nora came out onto the porch, drying her hands on her apron, calm as Sunday. And the marshal said, "Ma'am, you seen any Indians up here? Tracks, smoke, anything? Tell the truth now. There's a reward and there's a penalty for harboring, and I'd hate for a young thing like you to get tangled in your husband's business if it came to that." He was offering her a door. Reward on one side, safety on the other. All she had to do was tell the truth, and she'd been sold and lied to and dragged up a mountain into a secret that could hang her, and not one soul on this earth would have blamed a 19-year-old girl for pointing past the cottonwoods and washing her hands of all of it. She'd expected the worst from this place. Now the worst was standing in her yard offering her a way out, and the only price was 9 lives and a 4-year-old's hair. I held my breath, Cole held his. And Nora Hale lifted her chin and looked that marshal dead in the eye and opened her mouth. "I haven't seen a soul up here but my husband, his hand, and the inside of a sick room," Nora said. Her voice didn't shake. "I don't know how. I've thought about it for 2 years, and I still don't know how a girl that frightened made her voice come out that level. I've been laid up with the grip near a fortnight," she went on, and she even let a little tiredness into it, a little of the genuine exhaustion of 3 sleepless days nursing a septic leg, and she turned that exhaustion into the picture of a frail new bride down with winter fever, and it was the finest, bravest, most damning lie I ever heard a Christian tell. "Mr. Renner won't even let me to the well for fear I'll take a chill. You're welcome to look in the house, Marshal, but I'd thank you to keep your voice down. I get the headaches something terrible." Prout looked at her. He looked at Cole. He looked at me, and I, God forgive me, managed to arrange my guilty face into something I hoped passed for a worried husband's hired man, and I coughed, and I said the only thing my seized-up brain could produce, which was, "Doctor's 3 days off in this snow. We've been managing." And here is where the whole thing turned on a thread, friends, because Prout was not a stupid man. He knew talk had brought him here. He knew this spread was the likeliest place on the whole mountain. He looked at that locked barn past the cottonwoods and he said, "What's in the far building?" "6 stock," Cole said. "Glanders. You go in there breathing that, you'll carry it to every horse between here and the fort." He said it flat, bored, the voice of a man stating an inconvenient fact. "Search it if you want. I'd burn your clothes after." Glanders, Lord, the nerve of the man. There's not a horseman alive who will walk willing into a Glander's barn. It's a death sentence for stock and no joke for people. And Prout was a horseman, and Prout had a long ride back. And Prout looked at that barn, and looked at the snow coming down again out of a sky the color of a gun barrel, and did the arithmetic every traveler does, and decided that 9 reservation jumpers weren't worth the Glanders and the grip, and a frail wife's headaches, and a half-day's search in a building full of contagion. "I'll look in the house," he said. He looked in the house. He found a bedroom with a girl's carpetbag and a bolt on the inside of the door, and I watched that bolt give him pause, watched him file it away as the eccentricity of a cold marriage and nothing more. And he found a front room with a sofa that had clearly been slept on, and he found a kitchen and a sickbed, and the ordinary sad domestic evidence of a young wife laid up with fever. And he found nothing else, because there was nothing else to find that any of us would let him find. And then he mounted up and touched his hat to Nora, the liar, the savior, the bride, and said, "You feel better, ma'am," and rode back down the wash, and the 9 lives up past the cottonwoods went on breathing. Nora made it to the porch rail before her knees gave. Cole caught her. First time in 2 weeks of marriage that he'd touched her, and it was to keep her from falling, and she let him. And they stood there in the cold with the marshal's tracks already filling with snow, and neither one of them said a word because there wasn't a word big enough. The wounded man kept his leg. I want you to know that because so much of this telling is heavy and that part isn't. He kept his leg, and when the worst of the snow broke in late March, Desi judged it safe to move, and the band slipped north toward Canada, toward a place where the long arm of the agency couldn't reach, guided part of the way by Cole on the trails he knew, and provisioned out of the Sweetwater's own stores, which is to say out of Cole's own pocket, which is to say at a cost that nearly broke the ranch and which he paid without a single tally mark. The only man I ever knew who could spend like that and not count it. They went in the gray hour before dawn. I helped load the mules. My hips screamed the whole time and I never said a word about it, which for me is a kind of love. At the edge of the cottonwoods, Desi stopped in front of Nora. She didn't thank her. I think thanks would have been too small, the way words had been too small on the porch. Instead, she took something from around her own neck, a small thing worn. A token I won't describe because it wasn't mine to look at too closely, and she put it into Nora's hand and folded the girl's fingers over it, and she said something in her own language, low, and then in English, just for Nora. "You are not what they made you. You are what you chose. Remember it when this man," a glance at Cole, almost a smile, "is too stubborn to tell you so." And then they were gone into the gray and the mountain was empty and it was just the 4 of us again. Cole, Nora, me. And Wren. Because Wren stayed. That was the thing nobody planned. The thing that wasn't in any debt paper or any marriage license or any of Cole's careful, clumsy, protective arithmetic. The band went north, but Wren was Cole's, and Cole would not send his daughter into a winter flight she might not survive. And so the little ghost girl came down out of the barn for good and into a house where, for the first time in her short hidden life, she didn't have to disappear when a door opened. She took to Nora the way a plant takes to a window. I watched it happen over that spring. The girl who'd been sold to keep a secret became, without anybody saying the word out loud, a mother to a child who'd lost one, and Cole watched it too, watched the 2 of them in the garden, in the kitchen, on the porch in the long evening light, Wren's small hand in Nora's, Nora teaching her letters and Wren teaching Nora the words her own mother had left her, the 2 halves of that child's blood finally allowed to live in the same room, and the furnace under all that stone of his finally showed in his face where anyone could see it, and he didn't try to hide it anymore. He never did make a proper husband out of himself by churchly standards, mind. Theirs was its own slow thing, built backward from the usual order, trust first, then tenderness, then everything else, and not one piece of it forced or bought, every piece of it chosen which Desi had been right about was the only kind worth a damn. I'll leave most of it where it belongs, which is between them. But I'll tell you the last thing I wrote in my ledger about Nora Hale, because that's where this telling started and it's where it ought to end. It was a year on, near enough to the day she came up that wash road in the back of her father's wagon expecting the worst the world could do to her. It was evening. Cole had finally managed to say a thing out loud that he'd been saying with split firewood and bolted doors, and a sofa slept on for a year, and Nora had heard him, and she'd taken his hand across the supper table in front of me and the child and God and everybody. And she'd laughed first time I ever heard her laugh. A real one, surprised right out of her. And I had to go out on the porch again, on account of the discipline of the ranch.